Thanks so much for attending today's webinar, How RFID Increases Shipment Accuracy. It will be 45 minutes today. The first half an hour be a discussion by our two speakers. And based on your engagement with lots of questions during the past RFID webinars, we dedicated the last 15 minutes just to address your questions. Two housekeeping points before we get started. The session is being recorded and you will receive a link over the next few days by email. Secondly, please submit your questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A section, and we will be addressing these towards the end of the webinar. Barcodes Group is a leading provider of barcode, mobile computing, and RFID solutions. Our solution platforms bring together hardware, software, supplies, and support. Placed on points of transition, RFID technology can identify thousands of items per second and is capable of achieving a read accuracy rate above 99%. RFID automates tracking of shipments moving in and out of dock doors without direct line of sight, reducing the need for human intervention and manual scanning. To discuss how RFID can improve your organization's shipment accuracy, avoiding mistakes and chargebacks, we couldn't ask for two better speakers to explore this topic with you. As a principal RFID solutions architect with Barcodes Group, Tom O'Boyle designs, integrates, and deploys RFID solutions for a wide range of industries, including supply chain, manufacturing, healthcare, education, and retail. With over 20 years of RFID experience, Tom has been an industry leader, an early adopter of RFID technology. His work drove adoption of RFID solutions for wide area coverage, portal and dock door transactions, and software algorithms to improve read event data. Nat Hillary is a solutions engineer at Impinj, with more than a decade of experience designing, implementing, and deploying Impinj product-based RFID solutions across a range of customers and industries. Nat's primary focus is on supporting Impinj partners in pre-sales activities. Thanks for joining us today, Tom and Nat. Please take it away, Tom.
Thanks, Edwin, and welcome everybody. Thanks for hopping on to the webinar today. Before we get started, we're going to kick off the webinar with a quick poll. We really want to get a sense of the audience interest. So as you kind of look at the poll that popped up in front of you, please answer the question, and then once we're done with the poll, we'll kind of get started. So while the poll's happening, let me go through the agenda really fast. We're going to hit a number of topics. Topic number one is going to be, why is RFID hitting its stride? We're going to dive into why it's different today versus what it was in years gone by, and how that's really going to help us. Number two, what is shipment verification? It's a term we use in the industry, but it's not necessarily a term that everybody uses throughout their operation. So we're going to define that for you and let you know what we mean by shipment verification, specifically using RFID. We'll hit on the benefits of RFID, why we use it, where we get some value out of it, and why it's important to customers to understand that process. Because obviously from a benefit standpoint, what we really want more than anything is we want to make sure that you're getting an ROI based upon the system that you deploy. We'll hit up on what our Barcodes shipment verification system really is. So we'll go into some of the details about the components that are within there, what pieces that we use, both from a hardware, software, services, and tags perspective. And then one of the most important feature sets of an RFID system is actually the implementation, how to go about that. So we'll make sure that we go through those implementation processes and how we view things. So Nat and I have been doing this for quite a while, so hopefully we'll be able to expand our experience and help you gain some knowledge from that. So it looks like we got the poll results as expected. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating in that. And let me kind of move on to our first topic. So why is RFID hitting its stride? RFID is not a new technology. It's actually been around in industrial applications since the 1990s. However, long-range RFID, which means that we're able to read items that had tags on them more than a few inches, really evolved into a potential useful tool back in the early 2000s. It's at that point in time that some retailers and the Department of Defense started running some tests and pilots to try and determine if it could be used well in the supply chain world. Those tests yielded out that the technology could be used, but it probably really wasn't ready yet, right? So what we found in the early days is we had low accuracy rates. So our read rates were not anywhere near what we get today, which is in the very high 90s. It was typically around 80, 85%. So it was useful to learn, but it really wasn't useful to deploy. And so what we saw is we saw a very slow adoption. So the other part that's really changed, so that was what it was before. The other part that's really changed is how we were trying to use it. So in the past, everything was new. We had never done it before. We were trying to create a use case and a process, and everybody was really trying to figure it out. What that really led to is most of those pilots either dissipated away. A few of them became more relevant in stage, become really a rolled out process, but most of the pilots actually kind of slowed and decayed. What really helped us though is as we move forward here 20 years later, we were able to really zero in on how and what use cases we could deploy that really gave us successful transactions. Those use cases really now today are providing meaningful data, and the ROI to use them is being generated by the users themselves. So one core component, the RFID reader and tag technologies has advanced considerably, and our ability to power RFID tags and hear those tags is so much better today than it was before. What that really means is we can hear weaker, we can actually provide less power to hear tags, and it enables our use cases tremendously so that we actually can use some of our new antenna technology, excuse me, so that can confine our read zones and make sure that the tags we read, we hear, and we can read them well, and the tags that we don't want to hear, we can ignore. So that advancement in antenna technology and reader and tag performance has really helped us move forward the whole technology sphere and the application use case. Our knowledge has also completely expanded. So, what before, we had a process before in the early days, if we could hear the tag, it was acceptable. But what we really didn't understand is if we had to overpower the read zone in order to hear the tag, it meant that we were going to hear things that we didn't want to hear. So today, our knowledge on where to use it and how to use it has really helped us create what is becoming a very common platform of use cases. And what it really leads to is consistent, scalable solutions that we can and do deploy. So you couple that better technology, more knowledge of how to use it with what are some of the things that are happening today, right? Today in our industry, most of our customers have a hard time hiring, training, and retaining operational staff, right? Their workforce are constantly either changing over or they cannot fill that particular position, which means they got to do more with less. That's where automation can help, right? So what we're seeing is a need to automate in areas where we can become a little bit more accurate from a application standpoint and use that less labor in order to get either the same or more product out the door. So we're really seeing that as a major benefit where people are trying to automate because they have a very significant need to automate due to labor shortages. And one other key point, very specific to shipment verification. is in today's world, we see more product shipments than ever before. All of us are ordering online. We're ordering a product that is either being shipped from multiple different warehouses, being shipped from a store to our house. All of that leads to a lot more boxes, a lot more shipments. And anytime we have more boxes and more shipments and more manual labor associated with that, we have more opportunity for what we call missed shipments. And missed shipments are shipments that you didn't mean to ship, or it was the wrong product into the wrong truck. So the whole concept of getting the shipment right and being able to do that with either the same labor or a little bit less labor is significantly important to most of our customers. So Nat, maybe you can go through a little bit about what shipment verification is and how we kind of define that in the marketplace.
Absolutely. So shipment verification occurs, first of all, throughout the supply chain. So a manufacturer produces products that get put on pallets that get shipped to a distribution center, sometimes multiple distribution centers, before they get to an actual store, a retail store, for instance, or even a factory that's then going to convert them into another product. What shipment verification is simply a mechanism for making sure that what you think you're shipping out is actually what's being shipped out. So you're verifying the contents of the shipment outbound, and similarly at the recipient end, verifying that what you've received is actually what was intended to be sent, what was documented in the actual shipping notice. Using RFID, one of the biggest benefits of that is you can verify shipments without needing line of sight. You don't need to see the barcode to scan it. That means that you can not just read the pallet, but you can read some of the item level information as well. That streamlines automations, and we've seen some significant ROI improvements by going through the application of RFID to verify shipments. Just to pick up on what Tom was talking about earlier, omnichannel has really benefited from the use of RFID. Omnichannel describes the e-commerce practice of selling to the last item. And what they try to do, most organizations who have a web presence for their products, they try and sell to a customer from the most, like the closest store, if you like, or distribution center to the customer. In order to be able to offer everything that's online and make sure that it's accurate, they need to verify and they need to guarantee the accuracy of being able to verify the shipments that are through the supply chain. So when they offer 5 blue sweaters on their website, they know they have 5 blue sweaters in stock, so that they can hand on heart make sure that not only the customer is going to get what they want, but their own costs are minimized because they're shipping from the closest point to that customer, which minimizes shipping costs and also time to make that shipping as well. So shipment verification is the process of verifying that outbound and inbound shipments actually are what are expected.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the techniques we use when we're actually doing shipment verification is we know a few things. This is a learned event from the industry, right? We've learned that somebody putting, let's call it 100 boxes on a pallet and expecting an RFID reader to read all 100 boxes as it's driving, being driven by a forklift onto a truck at 5 miles an hour, that we normally can't consistently read that pallet, all the cartons on the pallet every time in a controlled, powered manner, right? And so what that really means is we've learned that before that pallet is going to go through that dock door, we will actually group that pallet together. So we'll take an opportunity to read all of the RFID carton labels, for instance, on that pallet before it goes through, so that we know here's what the group looks like. And when that group is looking, when it's all put together, we can read a subset of that group and know that the whole group went through. So what that's really done, and that's actually a learned event that we learned during the Department of Defense trials that started out in the early and mid 2000s, is grouping those cartons to pallets and then those pallets to shipments really allowed us to get that 90+% accuracy that we were always trying to aim for.
So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of using shipment verification and RFID in particular. The first is just return on investments. One of the truisms in our industry, in the supply chain and logistics industry, is the cost of correcting a misshipment is often as much as the original product shipment itself. For instance, I've had a situation where I've received products from Amazon and I've had an issue with it. I've called them up and said, hey, there's a problem with this product. But the cost of me sending that product back for them to replace it is so high, they're like, just keep the broken one, we'll send you a new one. So that's an example of how the economics of misshipments can really have an impact. I was working, for instance, with a brand name garment manufacturer, and at the distribution center, they were able to prove that if they eliminated misshipments with that distribution center, they could save $3.6 million a year. And that's not even talking about the impact it has on the customers and the customer attitude to that particular brand. You know, it's age-old thing. Well, yeah, I like their products, but I can never get the right thing. It never arrives on time. It erodes customer loyalty. Although it's hard to put a value on that, like an actual number on that, that's a significant thing. And increasing inventory accuracy, inventory awareness helps to engender that brand loyalty, which is great. So the ROI is making sure that you have the right products at the right place at the right time speak for themselves. But there's a lot of operational efficiencies that can be gained from using shipment verification. With a recent deployment, for instance, in no time at all, I think it was in the first month, we had a customer that was able to improve their overall dock door throughput by about 30% simply by verifying that the products that they were receiving were correct. You know, automating that process as they received the products, verifying it was correct and destined for that particular store. Improvement of 35%. And as I mentioned, during the, actually, I can't remember if I mentioned it, but during lockdown, when staffing, both staff availability in terms of having healthy staff, but also being able to have people on the payroll to fully staff a shift, when that became an issue, there was an increased demand for RFID to offset the impact of the staffing levels to make sure, by making sure that they were able to keep track of inventory accuracy as a result that way. These are the direct benefits. One of the things that I'm finding with a lot of customers as well is there's a lot of secondary benefits as well. For instance, having the data and the metrics to look at how their dock doors are used, how their forklifts are used, how getting real-time data to analyze the optimization of either receiving or shipping products. There's a lot of secondary benefits that can be gleaned from using shipment verification at this high level of accuracy that I think are we're only just seeing people starting to scratch the surface there as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. So one last point on ROI, Nat, that, you know, one of the things that we saw very large retailer in their distribution centers, you know, where they actually gained some of the efficiencies, they were very efficient, relatively speaking, before RFID. But one of the core things that they needed to do is their operators would scan a barcode off of the pallet before they loaded it onto a truck. So they had a device on the forklift that told them what products are to be scanned. They would actually come up to the pallet and sometimes have to find that barcode. Sometimes it was easy. It was right in front of them the way it should be, but other times it wasn't. And so either the operator had to get off the forklift or more than most likely use the forklift to manipulate the pallet to get the barcode in line so that they could scan it. Just that simple process alone really expedited what they could do in a shift, and the number of trucks just really increased. So the benefits aren't always, to your point, purely easy to identify just because of the cost of a missed shipment. It's just that process of shipping and being able to validate it, getting the same, they basically got an efficiency before, but now we're getting the efficiency without the labor costs involved in it. It was phenomenal. So I want to talk a little bit about what our barcode shipment verification portal system is, right? And it is a system. I guess I want to make sure that we reiterate that it's not just one component that makes it work properly. So the purpose of our shipment verification system is to validate the right product is going onto the right truck at the right time, right? So we're trying to make sure that we are able to alert that driver if they're putting the wrong thing on the truck before it gets completely on the truck, right? So we don't want them to know after they've loaded on a truck and come back out. We actually want to read it and identify it before they cross over into the truck itself. And we do that with a number of pieces, but one of the core pieces is our exclusive wave antenna technology. So on our portals, we use wave antennas, and those antennas are a little different than your standard industry grade patch antennas. A patch antenna, like you see on the graphic on the left-hand side, actually was made to do point-to-point communications outside of the RFID industry. So it was actually made for long-distance communication, and all of its energy actually emanates from basically a point on that patch, and it expands out from there. It expands out more, looks kind of like a football as it kind of comes out, and it expands after it gets out probably a foot or two away from the antenna, it expands wider and wider. And what we found is that it left us gaps and holes that we couldn't fill in order to read all of the things that we wanted to read on that pallet. On top of that, we had to overpower those antennas in order to read everything that we wanted, which meant that we were going farther beyond our normal portal boundaries. So if we had a portal set up at dock door 1, we were starting to see tags that were at dock door number 2. So, but our wave-in technology is a little different. It was made from the ground up to be an RFID antenna, and it radiates the entire length of the element, the antenna element itself, which means that we get a nice, smooth, clean RF energy that looks more like light coming off of a fluorescent light bulb versus a spotlight, as an example. So we're radiating the entire length, and we're doing that literally right at the edge of the antenna. So we get this incredible fill area so that we can read everything in that portal without overpowering it. And that's the key, is we're trying to run and read everything that we can in a controlled, powered manner so that we don't get the tag reads that we don't want. So we're really able to not only use our portal technology, and you kind of see on a slide off to the left, there's an image of a portal in a tunnel that we use those same wave antennas to do. But we also have our software. Our software, SLS View software, is written from the ground up to be RFID specific to control and manage readers at the lowest levels. So we literally have all of the knobs and little things that we can tune inside of a reader at our disposal in our software in order to tweak it appropriately to make it work the best. So that really gives us the ability to perform those transactions like we talked about, like shipment verification. And that software ties into a customer's ERP or WMS system. Usually the RFID system is not a database of record. There's usually another system that we need to report to. So the RFID system helps you run the transactions of shipping, but then it sends those transactions typically to a WMS and ERP system so that it can actually create and complete your shipping process in your financial system, create your bill of ladings and all of your documentation associated with it. One of the core things, though, besides software and the antenna hardware, is the supplies, the RFID tags. So we've seen this time and time again where we've gone out, we've set the system up, we've set it up with tags, and then if somebody is not using the same tags, and we get inconsistent results. And the whole purpose of our system is to be able to scale and deploy it appropriately so that it works every day, every shipment, all the time, right? So the supplies and getting the right tags for that use case is important. Our team, when we actually will deploy, will actually tune to those tags in that shipment to make sure that we're getting it correctly. So one of the things we don't want to do is see variance based upon tags. And, earlier in the process, we had, with the pandemic, like everything else, we had supply chain issues and people are sometimes having to try and substitute. And we're at a point now where we're actually able to make sure that that doesn't happen. But that consistency on tags also produces consistency on the data and the output. And probably the last critical component is the services side, our deployment team. So our deployment team is well skilled. We've installed over 20,000 portals, and most of those portals are in shipment or shipment transactions or shipping outbound or receiving inbound transactions. And we know how to deploy those in a very timely manner, tune them appropriately, and do that at scale so that from a customer perspective, we're getting it installed, we're getting it up and running, and they've got the best chance to start getting the return on investment at the right time. So all of those combined really make a system. And that to us, is what we're trying to do here is we're trying to be consistent, make sure the customer gets what they need, gets that high degree of accuracy, and starts getting their ROI that they're looking for.
Yeah, Tom, we've put a lot of effort, that we intend to put a lot of effort into trying to focus on algorithmic and antenna technologies, like using different antennas, different arrangements to try and improve the, to get a decent level of shipment accuracy. And in our experience, we have yet to come up with a solution that matches the level of accuracy and performance that we can get from the portals, the SLS portals that Barcodes provides. But we simply haven't found a better competing technology.
Yep, I understand. So let's talk about what to do about it. So we know what shipment verification is. We know that maybe we have a problem in an organization. What do? Well, one of the very first steps is to set an appointment with one of our solutions architects, right? We have a team of experienced RFID engineers that can help dive into the problem. And we're going to start asking some basics, right? We're going to really need to understand the exact business problem, what you're seeing, how you've tried to solve it, what the pieces are to that system and how it works today, right? So we're going to want to know the impact to your company, what's the cost impact when it goes wrong, and we're going to want some details. We're going to want to know what your current process is. How do you pick the product? How do you stage it? How do you load it today? Do you use barcode scanning, a manual checklist? Do you load live loads? Do you fully stage them before? We're going to want to know some of those details so that we can kind of get a sense of the problem. We're also going to want to know how many people are involved, what they do in that current task in order to fulfill your shipments. And then, of course, what the data is involved. What do they look at today? Is there a license plate that they scan on the pallet? Is there some other paperwork or some other data like weight or something else that they need to capture? So we're gonna want to get to understand that a little bit. And then once we get that understanding, we'll review the products that are being shipped, because we're going to need to figure out what tags might work, how are they palletized, how are they packaged, how many quantities are involved. And then we'll probably want to talk a little bit about, the facility itself, the doors. Are there separate receiving doors, shipping doors? Are they combined? What does the space between them look like? How does the doors go up is a question we ask. Does it go straight up? Is it garage style where it curls? We're just trying to figure out all the areas and what we need to do to make that work appropriately. But those details are really uncovered in those calls. So one one of the core things that a customer can do is get us involved so we can try and understand what the problem is and what the current status is.
Yeah, a couple of points I'd like to make to complement that, Tom. First of all, whenever we engage with the customer, they and we say, oh, what's your read target? They say, oh, we want to read 100%. But that's not always practical. Like, for instance, the example that I like to use is we have a produce distributor that wants to track watermelons, and they want to track 100% of their watermelons. Well, watermelons as an object are probably one of the most difficult things to apply a tag to because they're so rich in moisture, which desensitizes the tags that makes them very, very difficult things to tag. But we can tag the cartons, and actually tagging cartons with watermelons is extremely readable. So part of this process is understanding what you need to track and defining an appropriate method for doing so, a method that works. And this goes back to the experience that Tom was talking about. These are very hard-fought lessons that we of an industry have learned. It's not always possible to track everything. But then fitting RFID into the organization, it's important to understand that I think of it as a three-legged stool. You have to look at the people, the processes, and the technology that are affected by the use of RFID. So this process, starting with the solution architects, helps understand the impact on all three of those legs of the stool to make sure that RFID can be introduced into the organization in an appropriate way to achieve the return on investment objectives of the host organization.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, and one of the other things that will happen from this process. So let's say we have that conversation and things look like it might fit. So the technology might fit from an RFID perspective, the organization, the problem all seem to be appropriate. What do we do? Well, sometimes it all depends upon the product and what the mix looks like, but sometimes we will need to do what we call a site assessment, which means we need to see it for ourselves. We need to understand the process a little bit better. We need to see it in action. We might need to look at the doors and some of the mechanical sides. Sometimes we'll do a site assessment. Other times we will say we need to really figure out which tags are appropriate. Like you mentioned with the watermelons, we know nowadays that sticking a tag on the watermelon directly probably won't work, but there's other products that we may have to figure out which tags will work. We have a couple ways of doing that. Sometimes that is actually having the customers send us product to our test center and we can do some testing there. Other times the products aren't available or aren't able to. They're either too big, too large, too expensive, too dangerous to ship. There's lots of reasons. Then we will actually go to the customer site and we will do an assessment there, trying to tag things and bring some equipment with us and tags to make sure. So if all of that seems to be kind of working out, we actually tried to put together a high-level estimate. And that high-level estimate allows us to really start going down the path of an ROI calculation with the customer, so that customer can they understand what the costs are to them. They can understand what the cost for the system is, and we can start balancing where does it make sense overall. And if everything is seems to be still working out and the ROI seems to be there, one of our core things we do is we want to run something like a pilot. So typically a pilot is just a small subset of the overall system. It could be one particular product line. It could be a couple of dock doors. It could be a small facility, but the whole concept there is that we're able to understand, gain some efficiencies, make sure that we've got it nailed down, increase or add to the details of the ROI model, and then expand and scale from there. And that's our purpose, is we want to scale the system so that they get the ROI across the system, not just in one small area. So, it works in steps, but our whole goal is start a little small, gain the knowledge, and scale to make it completely visible to the whole organization.
Well, thank you very much, Tom and Nat, for sharing your insights. And now it's time for them to answer your questions. So please continue to enter those into the Q&A area. And While we get to those, we look forward to following up with you to discuss how RFID can help your business. So if you'd like to receive an evaluation from Tom and his team to discuss how RFID can improve your organization's accuracy and efficiency, please send us an email or complete a schedule request on either of the listed websites. So let's jump into questions. And the first one is related to RFID tags as compared to barcode labels. And that could be cost, that could be longevity. But if an RFID tag is more expensive than a barcode label, how does that factor into the ROI?
Yeah, well, for sure. So in many cases, the RFID tag will be more expensive typically than a standard barcode label. It does have some more components in it. It's got a chip and an antenna, as you would expect. So there is a little bit more components. So the ROI is really, you may have a material cost adder from a system perspective. So what you're really trying to do is recover that material cost based upon the system output. So whether that's improved labor rates, that could be improved shipment accuracy where you gain that efficiency back. It could be on lower inventory levels within your facility to not keep as much safety stock because of missed shipments. So you typically will see an increase in costs associated between a barcode label and an RFID label, but also keep in mind that that RFID label is also your barcode label, right? So we typically print a barcode in human readables on that RFID label, just like just like you do today. So what that gives you is it's a multi-purpose label as opposed to just a single purpose label.
Yeah, maybe the next one, and maybe Nat, you can take a crack at that one. So can RFID tags contain information such as how many boxes of a product on a pallet? So, and can that adjust? So if 4 boxes are moved off the pallet, the RFID tag can reflect the change.
The short answer is yes, but I wouldn't advise it. RFID tags have different memory regions, starting with an electronic product code memory region that tells you what that tag represents, whether it's an item, whether it's a carton, whether it's a pallet. And some tags also have user memory that can be used to add additional information like that. But it's, in my experience, embodying that information within the tags, the overhead of doing so, the overhead of system design, the time overhead of reading user memory, understanding and interpreting what's in user memory, tends not to add the value that you might suggest. So that information is best stored in the warehouse management system. So the tag is used to identify a carton, a pallet, whatever. And if the contents of that pallet, the contents of that carton are known to have changed, then the warehouse management system needs to be updated. For instance, I've seen where on inbound shipments, cartons are assessed against the actual shipping notice, and if a discrepancy is found, then the warehouse management system is updated to reflect the contents of the new contents, the known good contents of the carton. And that's something that RFID streamlines incredibly. And having it in the warehouse management system rather than the tag makes that information then generally available. You don't have to be in proximity of the carton in order to get that information as well.
So Tom, you touched a little bit on efficiency. Can you explain more like how RFID could improve like forklift efficiency?
Yeah, for sure. So we've had a customer actually in 2 areas that we did from an RFID standpoint. One of them is we put an RFID tag on forklifts and we were able to identify which area that forklift was allowed to go into. So some forklift types, whether they are gas or electric, can go into certain combustible areas or not. And they want, from a safety perspective, we actually put RFID tags on the forklifts, and based upon that tag, we would read that tag at the doorways. And if they weren't allowed to go through that doorway due to the type of forklift it is, we literally would not open the door and we would sound off an alarm. If the forklift was allowed to go through, we would open up the doorway. So we're able to help them actually lower their insurance costs because they were able to prove to their insurance provider that they were doing something extra to reduce chances of explosions. Second of all, we actually had customers where we put RFID tags and RFID tags on the forklift itself, and we put read zones around it. So we can now tell the path over history of how that forklift actually went through its day. What they were able to look at is to see how often somebody was backtracking back through their process. So it's not something that is gained instantaneously right away, but after looking at the history, the customer was able to go back and say, boy, I had 7 forklifts zigzagging all around. And if I created my pick list in a different way, I could actually reduce that forklift traffic, which meant that I could get more things out the door. So in many ways, we're actually trying to reduce the travel of that forklift. And the more you reduce the travel, the more things that they can move, the more processes that they can handle.
So now to follow up on your watermelon example. So somebody is using RFID, is using it for, a variety of items like dry food, frozen products, vegetables, fruit, frozen meat, containers carrying liquids such as olive oil and sauces. The result is 60% accuracy. Is that just because of the products, or are there improvements that you can anticipate making here?
Yeah, so going back to the three-legged stool, incorporating RFID as a technology requires looking at the people, the process, and the technology. So especially for groceries like that, not everything, the olive oil, for instance, is friendly to RFID. So it's appropriate then to choose the right level of tagging. When it comes to bulk shipments for olive oil in particular, the olive oil is shipped in cartons. And the great thing about olive oil in cartons is there's a lot of airspace that we can take advantage of to apply the RFID tag to. So in bulk, shipping or tracking things like olive oil or the dried fruits, things like that at the carton level is much more straightforward. It comes a little bit more challenging when it comes to picking items for a pallet, individual items, not cartons, for a pallet to go outbound. That can be addressed through the use of specific tagging. I have an idea in mind of there's this what we call a flag tag, where the RFID tag actually sticks out a bit. That helps to offset the impact of some of that product. But in my experience, the value at the item level of doing that so that you can keep track at the item level tends to be less beneficial than working at the carton level. But putting the items on the pallet and then applying a pallet tag to that pallet so that you can track everything on that pallet as the contents of a pick list, that is where RFID really comes into its own. So the process then is the discipline associated with reading stuff onto the pallet so that you know what's on the pallet, which is normally done by barcoding and manual count. But then you've got the pallet, you apply a license plate to the pallet with an RFID tag, then you know what pick list is associated with each pallet so you can make sure it gets to the right place.
And I would say one extra thing on that, Edwin. We would actually, if RFID tagging is appropriate for that particular mix, that's where we start looking at our aggregation process, taking a step backwards and actually trying to read all of those items as the pallet's being built or after it's been built, but in like a pallet wrap station where we can see it going round and round and round, we have a better chance of reading that. And that's where we actually taken as an example lettuce, which is highly water content. They could never get anything more than like 60 to 70% in consistency at a dock door. But we were actually able to read that at a pallet wrap station, confirm everything that was on the pallet, and then read it through the dock door. So we now got our accuracy way up into the high 90s because of that.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of questions still coming in. So even though we're at time, let's continue a few minutes. If you can stay on, that's great. If not, thanks again for attending. Question comes in about read ranges, the typical distance a tag can be read from, or what's the read range for the portal wave antenna? Maybe you can start with that, Tom.
Yeah, for sure. So one of our core things we're trying to do, especially at a portal, at a dock door, is we're trying to read at controlled power. So one of the mistakes we made over the years is testing tags at the highest power rating that the FCC would allow us to test. And we would come back and give the thumbs up and say we could read tags. And then we found out that not only could we read those tags, but we could read everything around us as well. And so it wasn't very useful. So at our portals, we actually run at a very low power on purpose to try and read in a controlled manner. So we are only trying to read things as a pallet actually moves up on the dock door right to the what they call the load plate, that metal part at the dock door. That's when we're trying to start reading tags. And then we want to read everything as it's just moving through that small zone. So we run things at low power. Now, we could turn it up and crank it up to the highest level the FCC allows us, and we can read tags sometimes 30, 40 feet away consistently. But that isn't what we're trying to do at a dock door portal, right? We're trying to keep everything in a controlled manner. When we do a cycle count, we actually want to do that because we're trying to read everything that's in the racks, and we're trying to read everything around. So we're actually running things at high power, and that's where we see those tags. And we have some tags, of course, that are the size of a car license plate that read a heck of a lot farther than tags that are very, very small too, right? So tag size really comes into play.
A question about some other use cases. So we talked a lot about shipment accuracy today. We will have coming up in April and next RFID webinar on returnable containers. But Nat, with all your experience, what do you see as the main use cases? And this particular individual is asking if you can do inventory with RFID.
Absolutely. In fact, retail is a perfect example of not just the use of RFID for inventory purposes, but how the benefits of that have led those organizations to look at how they can take advantage of RFID upstream. So most garment retailers use RFID for inventory count. And the best thing about the RFID, the way I describe it is this: when it comes to inventory count in a retail setting, I've spoken with a bunch of people who've been associates in a retail store, and when doing a stock count, they have to find the barcode, read it, find the barcode, read it, find the barcode, read it. They got halfway through the rack and they're like, oh my God, did I miss that one? No, let me go back and start again. And that can take an extended amount of time just to read a single rack. Whereas with an RFID reader, you just go beep, 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 read the whole rack. Every single item has its own unique EPC value, so you can be sure that you're reading all of the contents, not just a generic UPC. So it reduces the 1 or 2 minutes for inventorying a whole rack to a few seconds. But that can also be done with fixed infrastructure as well, so that you can monitor the inventory in a whole department. And going back to what I was saying about how retailers are looking at taking RFID upstream, they have these items already tagged, and many times they're tagged at the manufacturer. Actually, most times nowadays they're tagged at the manufacturer. So the RFID tags exist through the supply chain. So then the retailers quite reasonably are asking, well, how can we take advantage of this expense upstream? A good example of how they're taking advantage of that is on manufacturer compliance. as the products come in from the manufacturer, verifying that they're actually getting what they think they're getting from the manufacturer. Knowing that that's an accurate count coming in also helps to increase inventory accuracy as well. And I worked with one brand name garment manufacturer who found out that one of their manufacturers, there was a 25% discrepancy on a per carton basis between what the manufacturer said was going to come in versus what they actually received. And that chargeback was $70 a carton. So that's a lot of money that this particular brand name manufacturer wasn't even aware of that they had access to from their manufacturer until the use of RFID.
Great. So Tom, you touched on SLS View software. Can the software track items from site to site or warehouse to warehouse or throughout the supply chain?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, as you grow in that software, we actually have a module which is meant specifically for the whole supply chain. So we can actually see the tags of products moving out of one facility into another facility, out of that facility and into another facility. And through our software, and depending upon the user credentials, who's allowed to see what, we can actually display that data. So from an inventory standpoint, somebody can look to see how many do I have, how many have left but not received yet, so they know what's in transit, and then how many came in, and then how many got consumed if there's a consumption process in that supply chain. So for sure, it's definitely able to see from within a same company or between trading partners. It can do that perfectly.
So Nat, you touched on forklifts going 5 miles an hour. So could you expand a little bit how the technology is able to read trucks moving at that range of speed?
By trucks, do you mean forklifts or do you mean?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So in this particular instance, we're talking about the contents of the forklift, but you can also track the forklifts themselves. And the key method for making sure that you can read the tags going at that speed is making sure that you have a read zone that's big enough in order to have the time to read the tags. And that's exactly what the portals do. That's exactly what the SLS portals do. They establish that read zone and it's wide enough so you have enough time to read those tags as they go through. But of course, it also minimizes, by using that low power, it minimizes cross reads by constraining the read zone. So you'll only read if you're driving through the portal, not when you're driving past it.
Good. So the rest of the questions are kind of individual to the need of the person that asked them. What I will offer is that we will follow up with you directly and supply these answers. And at that moment, you can ask more questions if you have them.
Hey, Edwin, there's one particular question I'd like to just spend a moment on. And Roger's asked, what prevents RFID technology from being 100% accurate? I just wanted to talk about that. There are a number of different factors that affect the accuracy and the overall read rate of RFID. Starting with the tags themselves, the manufacturing process behind tags does not always yield 100%. So not all tags are readable, for instance. And then becomes a trade-off between, well, we can make sure that the tags that are delivered are 100% functional, but that's additional time and expense to add that verification process. Is that necessary? That's a question only an organization can answer for themselves. But then within the operating environment of RFID, all kinds of things can happen. You can have like trying to read watermelons or trying to read olive oil, just the actual substrate itself or the number of items make it difficult to read at 100% accuracy level. There was something else I was going to say. And then the choice of technology, like as I mentioned before, we have used a number of different technologies, from antenna combinations to algorithms, to try and achieve the level of results that SLS has achieved with their portals. And we simply haven't. So choosing the right technology, and in this particular instance, the SLS technology is the right technology for a dock door solution, helps to increase that read rate as well.
Yeah, and I would add one extra thing to that, and that is that it's not that we don't ever get 100% read rates. In fact, we typically do. We just don't guarantee it, because we're talking about low-level passive technology devices, right? So those devices are relying on radio waves to hit the tag, have the tag power up enough and respond back without anything getting in the way or anything colliding with it from a collision standpoint. So it's not guaranteed. We get pretty darn close, but we never want anybody to expect 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's great to close out the webinar. And thank you so much for staying on longer. We went to full hour, and I feel like we could go another hour based on the expertise that Tom and Nat have to share. But thanks so much for attending. If we can be of any help, please reach out to us.
Take care, everyone. Take care, everyone.